Drive 14 hours south of Darwin, past red dirt that stretches further than most European countries, and you will find a town where the population fits inside a single minivan. Larrimah, Northern Territory, Australia. 11 residents, 1 pub, 1 museum, 0 police, and 1 man who vanished into the outback night and was never seen again. This is not a ghost town waiting to die. This is a town where the people who stayed behind turned on each other, where feuds over pies and parking spots escalated into something law enforcement still cannot fully explain, where the silence of the Australian outback swallowed a human being whole, and his neighbors know more than they are saying. Today, we are going deep into what life actually looks like in one of the most isolated, most affordable, and most dangerous tiny communities left on Earth. A place where land costs less than a used car, where your nearest hospital is 3 hours away, and where your neighbor might be the last person who ever sees you alive. If you are watching this and dreaming of escaping the rat race, of disappearing into a place where rent does not exist and the modern world cannot reach you, Larrimah is the cautionary tale you need to hear first. Subscribe now, because every week we uncover places where life costs almost nothing, but the price you pay might be something else entirely. Chapter 1. The Last Stop Before Nothing. To understand Larrimah, you need to understand distance in the Australian outback. This is not distance the way Europeans or Americans think about it. This is not a 40-minute commute or a 2-hour road trip. This is a kind of emptiness that rewires your brain. Larrimah sits on the Stuart Highway, roughly 500 kilometers south of Darwin. The Stuart Highway is one long ribbon of asphalt that connects the top of Australia to the bottom, cutting through the Northern Territory like a scar. For hundreds of kilometers in every direction, there is nothing but red earth, termite mounds taller than a grown man, and sky so wide it makes you feel like an insect on a dinner plate. The town was founded during World War II as a military staging point. Back then, thousands of soldiers passed through. The railway ran here. There was an airfield, barracks, supply depots. Larrimah was alive, strategic, important. Then the war ended. The railway closed in 1976. The soldiers left, the families left, the businesses closed one by one. By the 2000s, Larrimah had shrunk from a wartime hub to a handful of stubborn human beings who simply refused to leave. Today, the infrastructure tells the story. There is one pub, the Larrimah Hotel, painted pink, serving cold beer to the occasional truckie passing through on the Stuart Highway. There is a small museum and tea house. There is a caravan park that might have one guest or might have none. There is no school, no doctor, no pharmacy, no supermarket, no mobile phone coverage in most spots, no mail delivery. The nearest proper town is Mataranka, about 70 kilometers north, and even that has fewer than 700 people. The rent here is essentially nothing. You can buy land for a few $1,000s. A caravan on a patch of dirt costs less than a month of rent in Sydney or Melbourne. If you wanted to, you could set up a life in Larrimah for less than most people spend on a holiday. But here is the question nobody asks in those cost of living calculators. What happens to human beings when you strip away everything, when you remove society, remove structure, remove witnesses, and leave a handful of strangers alone in the heat for decades? Larrimah answered that question in 2017. Chapter 2. The People Who Stayed Behind. By 2017, Larrimah had approximately 11 permanent residents, 11 people spread across a few square kilometers of red dirt, each one a character strange enough to deserve their own documentary. There was Paddy Moriarty, a 70-year-old Irishman who had lived in Larrimah for decades. Paddy ran a small property on the edge of town. He was a drinker, a talker, a man who spent most evenings at the Larrimah Hotel nursing beers and telling stories. He had a dog named Kellie, a mixed-breed Kelpie cross who went everywhere with him. Paddy was the kind of man the Outback attracts. Not running from the law, not hiding from debts, just someone who found the emptiness comfortable. He liked the heat. He liked the beer. He liked the fact that nobody told him what to do or when to do it. There was Fran Hodgetts, who ran the tea house and pie shop across from the pub. Fran was known for her pies, her devotion to her garden, and an intense, burning hatred of Paddy Moriarty that had been growing for years. There was Barry Sharp, the publican, who ran the Larrimah Hotel with his partner. There was Bill, an elderly caretaker who looked after the old museum. There was Carl, Cookie, and a handful of others, each occupying their own patch of territory in this dying town. What you need to understand is that these people were not a community in any normal sense. They were not friends who chose to live together. They were strangers who had, for various reasons, ended up in the same nowhere, and proximity had turned them into enemies. In a city of millions, you can avoid someone you dislike. You simply never see them again. In Larrimah, you see the same 11 faces every single day. You hear their cars. You know when they wake up. You know when they go to bed. You know their routines better than a surveillance camera would. And when a grudge forms in a place like that, it does not cool down. It has nowhere to go. It just sits in the heat, day after day, year after year, cooking like the red earth under the tropical sun. The feud between Paddy Moriarty and Fran Hodgetts became the dark heart of Larrimah. It started over something almost absurdly small. Paddy's dog allegedly killed some of Fran's birds. Or maybe it was about the pie shop competing with the pub. Or maybe it was about noise or boundaries or a comment made 10 years ago that neither could forget. Whatever sparked it, by 2017, the hatred was absolute. Fran had allegedly poisoned Paddy's previous dogs. Paddy had allegedly made threats. Other residents had taken sides or tried to stay neutral, which in a town of 11 people is almost impossible. This was not a quaint village disagreement. This was two human beings locked in a cage of geography, simmering for years, with no police, no mediator, no escape valve, just heat, silence, and rage. Chapter 3. The night Paddy disappeared. On the 16th of December, 2017, Paddy Moriarty left the Larrimah Hotel at around 6 in the evening. He had been drinking, as usual. He climbed onto his quad bike with Kellie the dog and rode the short distance back to his property. Nobody saw him after that. The next morning, his quad bike was found at his house. His hat was on the table. His reading glasses were inside. His medication was untouched. His wallet was there. His thongs, the Australian flip-flops he wore every day, were by the door. But Paddy was gone, and so was Kellie. In a city, a missing person triggers an immediate response. Police, cameras, witnesses, digital trails. In Larrimah, there was nothing. No CCTV, no mobile phone data, no witnesses who would talk. Just 11 people, red dirt, and silence. When police arrived, they found something else. The gravel around Paddy's property had been recently raked. Someone had taken a rake or a branch and smoothed over the ground, erasing any tracks, any drag marks, any evidence of what had happened between 6 in the evening and the following morning. Think about that for a moment. In a town of 11 people, someone took the time to rake the earth clean. Someone who knew that dirt tells stories. Someone who understood that in the Outback, the ground is your witness. Police searched for weeks. They brought in cadaver dogs. They dug up properties. They drained water tanks. They searched the bush for kilometers in every direction. They found nothing. Not a bone, not a thread of clothing, not a single trace of Paddy or Kellie. A man and his dog had been erased from existence in the space of 12 hours. In a town where everyone knows everything about everyone. Chapter 4. The investigation that went nowhere. The Northern Territory Police threw significant resources at the case. They interviewed every resident of Larrimah multiple times. They conducted forensic searches. They offered rewards, they made public appeals, and they hit a wall of silence and contradiction. Here is what they pieced together. Several residents had heard Paddy arrive home on his quad bike that evening. The engine noise was distinctive, in a place where any sound carries for kilometers. After that, nothing unusual was reported. No screams, no vehicles leaving town, no strangers passing through. Suspicion fell heavily on Fran Hodgetts. The years of feuding, the alleged dog poisonings, the proximity, the motive. Police searched her property extensively. They found disturbed earth. They found chemical traces. But they did not find Paddy. Fran denied any involvement. She maintained this denial until her death in 2019, when she passed away from natural causes without ever being charged. Other residents gave conflicting accounts. Some claimed to have heard things, others claimed to have seen things. But nothing was consistent enough, nothing was solid enough, and in the absence of a body, the case remained classified as a missing person investigation rather than a murder. The coroner's inquest in 2021 concluded that Paddy was likely murdered by a person or persons known to him. The coroner noted that the raking of the ground indicated deliberate concealment. The coroner noted the feud with Fran, but without a body, without physical evidence, without a confession, no charges were ever laid. Paddy Moriarty remains missing to this day. Kellie the dog remains missing. The Outback kept its secret. Chapter 5. What Larrimah teaches about extreme isolation. Now let us step back from the crime and talk about what Larrimah reveals about the psychology of tiny communities, because this is where the cost of living conversation gets complicated. Online, you will find thousands of videos and articles celebrating the idea of escaping to a tiny town. The fantasy goes like this: buy cheap land, build a simple home, live off the grid, no commute, no boss, no rent, freedom. And in purely financial terms, Larrimah delivers on that promise. You could live here for almost nothing. The climate is warm. The land is available. Nobody is going to charge you $1 million for a 2-bedroom flat. If your only metric is dollars spent per month, Larrimah is paradise. But Larrimah also reveals the hidden costs that never appear on a spreadsheet. The first hidden cost is social friction. When your community is tiny, every relationship carries enormous weight. In a city, a disagreement with a neighbor is an inconvenience. In Larrimah, a disagreement with a neighbor is inescapable. You will see that person every day. You will hear them. You will know their movements. And if that relationship turns toxic, there is no buffer, no other friends to distract you, no other places to go, just you, them, and the heat. The second hidden cost is the absence of systems. In a city, systems protect you invisibly. Police respond in minutes. Hospitals are nearby. Courts exist. Witnesses exist. Social norms are enforced by the sheer presence of other people. In Larrimah, none of these systems function. If something happens to you, the response time is measured in hours. If someone wants to harm you, there are no cameras, no passers-by, no quick intervention. You are relying entirely on the goodwill of the people around you. The third hidden cost is psychological. Human beings evolved in groups of around 150. We are wired for a certain density of social interaction. Strip that away, and strange things happen. Paranoia increases. Minor grievances become obsessions. The boundary between rational and irrational behavior starts to blur. The heat does not help. The isolation does not help. The sameness of every single day does not help. Larrimah is what happens when you take the cheapest possible living situation and push it to its logical extreme. The financial cost approaches zero. The human cost can be everything. Chapter 6. The geography of disappearing. One reason Paddy's body was never found is simply the landscape itself. The Northern Territory covers 1.35 million square kilometers. It is roughly twice the size of Texas. It has a population of around 250,000 people. That means vast stretches of this land have never been walked by a human being in modern times. The bush around Larrimah is dense tropical savanna. Termite mounds dot the landscape like ancient tombstones. The soil is red, iron-rich earth that bakes hard in the dry season and turns to bog in the wet. Creeks appear and disappear with the monsoon. Sinkholes open without warning. Old mine shafts riddle the ground from prospecting eras long forgotten. If you wanted to hide something in this landscape, you could walk 20 minutes in any direction and find a place no person would visit for decades. An old well, a termite mound, a flooded creek bed. The bush closes over everything. Within a wet season, vegetation reclaims any disturbed earth. Within a year, you would never know anything had been there. This is the reality of Outback Australia that the tourism brochures leave out. The land itself is complicit in disappearance. It does not just allow secrets, it actively conceals them. The red dirt swallows, the monsoon erases, the bush grows back, and time does the rest. For anyone considering a move to extreme isolation, this is the flip side of the freedom equation. Yes, nobody bothers you, but also nobody saves you. The same emptiness that liberates you also makes you vulnerable in ways that urban people never have to consider. Chapter 7. The economics of a dying town. Let us talk money, because that is what brought you here. Larrimah's economy, such as it is, runs on three things: the pub, which serves passing truck drivers and the occasional tourist; the museum and tea house, which operated on donations and curiosity; and government pensions, which keep most elderly residents fed and sheltered. There is no employment in Larrimah. There is no industry. There is no agriculture worth mentioning. There is no service economy because there are not enough people to serve. The town exists purely because a handful of people refuse to leave, and the Stuart Highway brings just enough passing trade to keep the pub lights on. Property values reflect this reality. You can acquire land in and around Larrimah for prices that would not cover a single month of rent in any Australian capital city. We are talking a few $1,000s for a patch of dirt. Add a second-hand caravan or a corrugated iron structure, and you have a home for under $10,000 total. Your ongoing costs are minimal. No council rates to speak of. Power comes from generators or solar panels. Water comes from bores or tanks. Food comes from bulk buying on supply runs to Katherine, about 270 kilometers north, or Mataranka. A realistic monthly budget for living in a place like Larrimah might look like this. Generator fuel, around $200 to $300, depending on usage. Food supplies, $300 to $400 if you buy in bulk and do not waste. Vehicle maintenance, essential because without a working car, you are stranded, perhaps $100 to $200 averaged monthly. Beer at the pub, variable, but let us say $100 to $200. Medical costs for supply runs to Darwin or Katherine when needed. Insurance, if you bother. Total monthly cost of living, somewhere between $800 and $1,500 Australian dollars. In 2025, that is roughly $500 to $1,000 US per month for a life in one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. Compare that to Sydney, where average rent alone exceeds $3,000 per month for a one-bedroom apartment, or Melbourne at $2,500, or even regional Australian towns, where $1,200 per month barely covers rent. On paper, Larrimah is financial freedom. In practice, Larrimah is a different kind of prison. Chapter 8. The pub that holds everything together. The Larrimah Hotel is painted pink. It sits on the Stuart Highway like a sunburnt mirage. It has a corrugated iron roof, a wide veranda, a bar that smells of decades of spilled beer, and a collection of memorabilia nailed to every surface. This pub is not just a business. It is the town's living room, its church, its courthouse, and its therapist's office. When you have 11 residents and one pub, that pub becomes everything. It is where news is shared, It is where grievances are aired. It is where alliances form and break. It is where the long, empty hours of outback life find some kind of shape. Truckies stop here on the long haul between Darwin and Alice Springs. Grey nomads, the retired Australians travelling the country in caravans, pull in for a cold beer and a photo. Occasionally, a journalist arrives asking about Paddy. The economics of running a pub in a town of 11 people are exactly as bleak as you would imagine. Revenue is almost entirely dependent on passing highway traffic. A good day might see 20 customers. A bad day might see 2. The wet season, from November to March, can cut traffic to almost nothing as roads flood and travelers avoid the region. Yet the pub survives. It has survived for decades. It survives because it is the only option for hundreds of kilometers. It survives because Australians have a cultural attachment to the Outback pub that borders on religious, and it survives because the alternative, closing down, would mean Larrimah loses its last reason to exist on any map at all. For the residents, the pub also serves a function that is easy to underestimate. It gives the day structure. When you live in a place with no job, no appointments, no schedule, and no reason to get dressed in the morning, having somewhere to be at 5 in the afternoon is the difference between sanity and madness. The pub is a clock. It divides the formless outback day into before and after. Without it, time becomes a flat circle that slowly drives people to strange places in their own heads. Chapter 9. What happened after Paddy? After Paddy's disappearance, Larrimah became briefly famous. Journalists arrived. Podcast producers arrived. A documentary was made. A true crime book called In the Middle of Nowhere was published. Suddenly, this town that nobody had heard of was international news. The attention did not help. Fran Hodgetts died in 2019 without being charged. Her death removed the primary suspect from the investigation and effectively ended any hope of resolution through confession or trial. Other residents aged. Some left. The population, already tiny, continued to shrink. The attention brought tourists briefly, people wanting to see where it happened, wanting to drink at the pub, wanting to photograph the emptiness. But curiosity tourism does not sustain a town. The podcast that covered the case, called Lost in Larrimah, brought international attention from people who had never heard of the Northern Territory, let alone a speck on the map halfway between Darwin and Alice Springs. For a few months, the pub saw more visitors than it had in years. People drove hours out of their way to stand on the dirt where Paddy's quad bike was found, to take selfies in front of the Pink Hotel, to peer through the fence at Fran's old property. But true crime tourism has a short shelf life. The podcast listeners moved on to the next case. The journalists found new stories. The grey nomads ticked Larrimah off their list and kept driving south, and within a year, the town returned to its default state. Quiet, hot, empty, waiting. Today, Larrimah continues to exist in a state of suspended decline. The pub opens. The highway brings traffic. The remaining residents go about their days in the same heat, the same silence, the same routines that have defined this place for decades. But the story hangs over everything. You cannot visit Larrimah without thinking about Paddy. You cannot drink at the pub without wondering what the person next to you knows. You cannot look at the red dirt without wondering what it is hiding. This is the legacy of violence in a tiny community. It does not heal, it does not fade, it just becomes part of the atmosphere, like the heat, like the dust, like the silence. Chapter 10. The climate nobody warns you about. Before you romanticize the outback lifestyle, let us talk about what the weather actually does to a human body and mind in this part of Australia. Larrimah sits in the tropical zone of the Northern Territory. That means 2 seasons. The dry, from May to October, when temperatures sit around 30 to 35 degrees Celsius during the day, and the wet, from November to April, When the humidity climbs above 80%, temperatures push past 40, and the sky opens with monsoon rains that turn dirt roads into rivers within minutes. During the wet season, Larrimah can become effectively cut off. Minor roads flood, creek crossings become impassable. Even the Stuart Highway occasionally closes during extreme weather events. If you need medical help during a monsoon downpour, you are waiting until the water recedes or hoping a helicopter can fly in conditions that often ground aircraft. The heat is not just uncomfortable, it is cognitively destructive. Studies on prolonged heat exposure show measurable declines in decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation. People become shorter-tempered. They sleep poorly, they drink more, they fixate on minor irritations because the heat removes their capacity to let things go. Now imagine that heat applied to a group of 11 people who already dislike each other, who already have unresolved grievances stretching back years, who already have nothing to do all day except sit and think about those grievances. The climate is not just backdrop in a place like Larrimah. It is an active ingredient in whatever chemistry produces the kind of tension that ends in someone disappearing. Chapter 11. Lessons for anyone dreaming of escape. So what does Larrimah teach us? Here is what I think it comes down to. The dream of extreme low-cost living is real. You can escape the financial system. You can find places where money barely matters. You can strip your life down to bare essentials and survive on almost nothing. That part is true, but the dream never accounts for what fills the space that money used to occupy. When you remove financial stress, something else rushes in. Boredom, loneliness, friction, paranoia, the slow erosion of social skills, the gradual narrowing of your world until the only thing that matters is whether your neighbor's dog crossed onto your property again. Larrimah is an extreme case. Most small towns do not end in disappearance and suspected murder, but the underlying dynamics exist everywhere along the spectrum of isolation. The smaller the community, the larger each relationship looms. The more remote the location, the fewer safety nets exist. The cheaper the cost of living, the more you pay in other currencies. If you are genuinely considering a move to extreme isolation, here are the questions Larrimah suggests you ask yourself. Can you handle seeing the same small number of faces every single day for years? Can you maintain your own mental health without the infrastructure of a larger community? Do you have the mechanical skills to maintain vehicles, generators, water systems, and structures without easy access to tradespeople? Can you manage medical needs with a 3-hour drive to the nearest hospital? And most importantly, do you have an exit plan if it goes wrong? The people who thrive in remote Australia tend to share certain traits. They are self-sufficient practically, they are emotionally resilient, they have strong relationships with the small number of people around them, and critically, they have chosen to be there, not ended up there by default. The people who struggle, and sometimes the people who disappear, tend to be those who arrived running from something rather than running towards something. They came for the cheapness and the emptiness without understanding that cheapness and emptiness are not the same as peace. Chapter 12. Larrimah in 2025. As of this year, Larrimah still appears on the map. The pub still opens, the highway still runs past. The population hovers in single digits now, lower than it was in 2017. The Northern Territory government has discussed various plans for the region over the years. Tourism development, heritage preservation, road upgrades, but for a town of fewer than 10 people, government investment is difficult to justify. The cost of sealing a single kilometre of Outback Road can exceed $1 million. Running power lines or telecommunications infrastructure to serve 8 or 9 residents does not make economic sense by any measure a bureaucrat would recognize. And so Larrimah exists in a kind of governmental blind spot, too small to invest in, too stubborn to officially close. The services that do reach it arrive by accident of geography, because it happens to sit on a highway that connects places that actually matter to the economy. The reality is that Larrimah will likely disappear within our lifetimes, not dramatically, not through catastrophe, but through the quiet mathematics of aging. Its residents are elderly. No young people are moving in. No families are starting here. When the last resident dies or leaves, the pub will close, the buildings will decay, and the bush will slowly reclaim the cleared land. Within a generation, Larrimah will join the hundreds of other ghost towns scattered across the Australian Outback, places that once served a purpose, once held human life, and now sit empty under the sun, slowly returning to red earth. But even in death, Larrimah will carry its story, the story of Paddy and Kellie, the story of what happens when isolation curdles into something darker, the story of a town that proved the cheapest place to live might also be the most expensive place to die. If you are planning your own escape, whether to outback Australia, to rural Southeast Asia, to the mountains of Eastern Europe, or anywhere that promises freedom through emptiness, remember Larrimah. Remember that the cost of living is never just about money. Remember that freedom without community is just a more comfortable kind of loneliness. And remember that the Outback does not care whether you find peace or whether you vanish. It simply watches and waits and keeps its secrets buried deep beneath the red earth. If this video gave you something to think about, hit subscribe. Every week, we explore places where life costs almost nothing and ask whether the trade-offs are worth it. Drop a comment telling me this. Would you live in a town of 11 people if rent was free? I want to know your honest answer. I will see you in the next one.